You're live with Trifecta Sports Talk. I'm your host, Tanner Arbello. It is Friday, July 14th here, and I am live from Wire Studio here in Boston, Massachusetts. It's the first Friday show I'm doing at Wire in a long time. It's probably about a month and a half since I've actually done a Friday show. Primarily, I've done the Wednesday 2 to 4, and then the Friday show has been done usually remotely. We've done it in Newport, Rhode Island, overlooking the bridge. We've done it at McCoy Stadium, so a variety of different locations. So today's a bit different, and today's a jam-packed show because we have a lot of breaking news. Probably one of the busiest Fridays in the summertime so far. Probably one of the busiest Fridays of the year in terms of sports news. It seems like every 10 minutes we're getting some kind of update. And one of the updates, which came at 1:30, was a Boston Celtics major announcement. The Boston Celtics put out a press release as well as a press conference where Danny Ainge was present at. But this is what they said. They announced that they have signed all-star forward Gordon Hayward. Hayward said this about the Boston Celtics. Whether you're talking about the team's past, present, or future, the Boston Celtics are truly special. I can't wait to be part of a winning culture of Boston and join my teammates and coach, Stevens, as we work together to bring Celtics banner 18. Wick Grossbeck also had a comment as well. Wick Grossbeck is the governor and managing partner of the Boston Celtics. He said, I'm very happy to welcome Gordon and his family to the Celtics organization in the city of Boston. He's improved his game every year in the NBA to an all-star level. We have been patient during the rebuilding process and hope to step forward and compete at the highest level. Danny Ainge also said this. He said that this is a big day in Celtics history. Adding Gordon as a current all-star in the prime of his career to an already good group of players is a reason for excitement. So they had the press conference today. This is several weeks after they actually announced this. Because on July 4th was when Gordon Hayward technically announced via the Players Tribune that he'd be signing with the Boston Celtics. And that's what happens in the NBA. You sometimes have to wait some time after a move has occurred. So with Gordon Hayward, it's very interesting because earlier in the day on July 4th, there was a report from an ESPN reporter, Chris Haynes, who basically announced that Gordon Hayward was coming to the Boston Celtics. The agent for Hayward basically declined to say that. He refused it and said they actually hadn't come up with a decision at that point, which was a bit peculiar. And I think it was Adrian Wojnarowski of ESPN refuted the report as well. And someone went on to say that if this agent's so credible that if he says something like that, he's telling the truth. Then later in the day, Gordon Hayward released a report via the Players Tribune announcing that he was coming to the Boston Celtics and he was apologizing and thanking the Utah Jazz for his time there, 7 seasons to be exact, his entire career up until that point. So if you believe the agent at that point, and I don't actually, I believe that Gordon Hayward made a decision, and the fact that he had to write a 2,000-word Players Tribune post probably took him the entire day. This was the decision he made. And if you believe the reports coming out of Boston, coming out of national guys leading up into it, you believe the Boston Celtics were favorites, and yes, it was the Brad Stevens connection. And in the Players Tribune report, you saw Gordon Hayward reference Stevens quite a bit. His former college coach at Butler. I believe he made that decision to go with the Boston Celtics probably after the meeting with Boston. We'll talk a little bit later about Gordon's father and how he talked about that and how Gordon felt after that meeting. But I do believe he made up his mind. When Chris Haynes reported that, Gordon Hayward has made a decision to pick the Boston Celtics, I believe that was the decision that they made. And after the fact, the agent covered it up saying that Gordon had actually written 3 separate posts, one for the Miami Heat, one for the Utah Jazz, and one for the Boston Celtics, and ended up running the Boston Celtics one. And I highly doubt that because it doesn't seem logical. It doesn't seem reasonable, and I doubt he wrote 6,000 words. Even if he had eliminated the Miami Heat the night before, which he probably did, Still don't believe he even wrote 2 of those posts. Just doesn't seem right. So Danny Ainge had his press conference this afternoon. It was at 1:30. A couple other information actually came out during that press conference, including the team has announced via the Vertical. Vertical's reporting a 4-year, $6 million rookie contract for guard Abdel Nader. He was a 2016 second-round pick for the Boston Celtics. He played for the played last year with the Red Claws, I believe, in Maine. So they announced that as well. Ainge had a lot to say at his press conference, actually. He mentioned that Gordon Hayward would be wearing the number 20, which was Ray Allen's number. So Ray Allen's number will not be retired. In fact, it will be Gordon Hayward wearing that number. Danny Ainge also said that he thinks the team is much better than last year, despite the fact that they traded away Avery Bradley, let go Kelly Olynyk and Jonas Drepko, and Amir Johnson. And we'll have more on that later and talk about those players. But Ainge also said that there was uncertainty with Avery Bradley and that there was a flight risk for him in terms of being on an expiring contract. So that's one of the things they're worried about. Ainge also said that he was worried about Gordon Hayward making a decision change. When he saw the early report early in their day, then he saw the agent's comments. He was worried that Gordon was going to change his mind. And the fact that he didn't hear actually from Gordon Hayward's camp until the Players Tribune article actually dropped. This is according to Danny Ainge, and obviously they're going to say something like that. When talking about expectations throughout the team, Danny Ainge says, I like high expectations. So you're going into this season for the Boston Celtics with a lot of high and lofty expectations on them. And the fact is, it's tough to go all in right now in this current NBA system. You look out in the Western Conference, and it is a stacked Western Conference. Last time I did a show where I didn't just talk about baseball, the Western Conference wasn't as strong as it was today. You know, the fact is, we have a super team now in the Houston Rockets, who added Chris Paul, who extended James Harden, and potentially might land Carmelo Anthony. So that's the interesting part right now, is that Carmelo Anthony of the New York Knicks could be traded. They just signed a new GM there after Phil Jackson left. There's a new guy down there who's going to make decisions for them. And the rumor is that Carmelo is being connected to the Cleveland Cavaliers and the Houston Rockets, but talks have stalled over the last 24 hours. But if Carmelo goes west, if he goes and joins the Houston Rockets, that Rockets team won't win anything. They'll be fun to watch. They could put up a gunfight against the Golden State Warriors. But that Western Conference is stacked. Paul George is now with the Oklahoma City Thunder, playing with Russell Westbrook. Jimmy Butler from the Chicago Bulls got traded out to the Minnesota Timberwolves to play with Karl Anthony Towns and that team out there. So if you really look at the way the league is built, you know, if you're the Boston Celtics in the Eastern Conference, you have to feel really good about your chances of competing with the Cleveland Cavaliers. Cleveland lost their GM, David Griffin, walked away. LeBron's reportedly unhappy with that situation up there. And you saw it in the NBA Finals. That team is not going to compete with the Golden State Warriors. They simply cannot beat Kevin Durant, Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, and Draymond Green. And they just re-signed Andre Iguodala out there as well. That Warriors team is that's a beast to be reckoned with. And I don't think any team in the West is actually going to compete with them. I think ultimately they're going to be the champion of the West, despite the West getting better. In the Eastern Conference, it is an interesting conversation to have with the Boston Celtics. Gordon Hayward gives you a top 10 small forward. Will Isaiah Thomas be the 5th runner-up for the MVP again? Will he average 29 points a game? Probably not. And that's simply not because he's going to be inefficient or he's going to be worse. It's the fact that he now has Gordon Hayward, who averaged 21 points a game last year and who has the potential in this Boston Celtics offense to average 25-plus points a game. If you look at the Utah Jazz, the way they run their plays, the Utah Jazz last year made the playoffs by slowing the game down. And in turn, slowed down the production of Gordon Hayward. You could see Hayward have a really big year. It's probably a career year here in Boston under Brad Stevens, running alongside Isaiah Thomas. I think Al Horford will have a better year than last year. He's going to be more comfortable with the system. I think they know how to use him. We can spread that floor open for them. He can allow Gordon Hayward to drive to the rim more effectively, because out in Utah, he had Rudy Gobert. Rudy Gobert is a great player, but he doesn't stretch the floor for you. He doesn't draw the bigs out of the paint, and that's what Al Horford can do. The Celtics team is going to be a different team. They don't have Amir Johnson anymore. Amir Johnson was their starting center. So who's going to be your starting center? Is it going to be Intai Zizic coming over from Europe? Yeah, look a little slow to start Summer League, but the last couple of games there for Zizic has been amazing. In fact, he has shown he could be the rebounder the Boston Celtics desperately need. Because if you remember the Eastern Conference Finals, Tristan Thompson owned you in the paint. Tristan Thompson was a vacuum on the boards, and you definitely need that for the Boston Celtics. They did add Marcus Morris and Aaron Baines, both from Detroit. Morris came over in the Avery Bradley trade where they sent Avery Bradley in a second-round pick to the Detroit Pistons for Morris. You might know Morris's brother, Markieff Morris, played against the Boston Celtics in the divisional rounds against the Washington Wizards. He was the one that injured his foot and ended up playing through it, and he was a beast. Markieff Morris is. And Marcus Morris had relatively so-so year with the Detroit Pistons and has had kind of personnel problems in his career, got into fights with his teammates and along those lines, but reportedly he's developed more into a veteran type of player. And he did play alongside Andre Drummond up there. So did Aaron Baines. So maybe you'll see a rebounding from those guys, maybe some uptick in their production. So maybe that will happen. So Marcus Morris last year for the Detroit Pistons, I think he averaged 4.4 rebounds per game. So that's not fantastic, but that's what he is, a small forward, and that's kind of more the question of the issue is with this Boston Celtics team is that they're loaded at the wing position. You have Jaylen Brown, second-year wing. You have Jason Tatum, who they just drafted with the number 3 pick. You have Jay Crowder, who is still on the team because he has a $6 million a year cap hit for 3 more years. Now you have Gordon Hayward and Marcus Morris. And obviously positionless basketball is something that Brad Stevens values a lot. And that's kind of where the league's going to, is more of like a positionless kind of play. And you can play some small ball. You can play Jay Crowder at the 4. You can play Morris at the 4 if you want. You can have Al Horford at the center position. Baines will probably start there, I'd have to assume. But it's going to be interesting to see. They have a lot of wings here. Not too many pure shooters. They don't really have a traditional shooting guard here with the Boston Celtics. You might see Jaylen Brown play the 2, or at least guard the 2 position. That's what he was talking about in Summer League. He said he might be asked to do that. Because when you traded away Avery Bradley, you kind of messed up your shooting guard position. What are you going to use there at the 2 guard? Obviously Isaiah Thomas is going to be your starting 1. It's obviously going to run the point for you. But is it going to be Marcus Smart at the 2 guard, or are you going to start Jaylen Brown there? You don't really know what they're going to do. They're going to really play positionless basketball, Brad Stevens. It's going to be interesting to see what he comes up with, the lineups he comes up with. Who's he going to throw at center? Is he going to play small ball? Because he's probably going to have to a lot. It really will be something to watch, something to behold. Will they compete with a team like the Cleveland Cavaliers? I think they could. The turmoil coming out of Cleveland, the reports that LeBron has had it, and he's probably walking at the end of the year, there could be a hole there. There could be a gap for the Boston Celtics to make it to the finals. But they're not going to compete with the Golden State Warriors. The fact is, when they missed out on Paul George, that ship sailed in terms of winning a 18th banner this year. The following year, you have something there. Something could happen. But the way it sits, I don't see them competing. But if you watched a player like Jason Tatum in Summer League, the guy can make shots. When they were saying that this guy is Paul Pierce 2.0, they weren't kidding. You can see it in him. You can see the way he plays, the way he can create his own shots, the way he's money from mid-range. It is impressive, and he's a two-way player too. So if Jason Tatum can be better than Jaylen Brown was last year, and if Jaylen Brown can be better than he was last year, those 2 players right there are young, and they are the real future of this team. Sure, Gordon Hayward is a fantastic player, and he should be really good here. But if you're talking about banner 18, banner 19, look at Tatum, look at Brown. Those are the guys right there. And you still have the 18th Brooklyn pick coming up, and who knows what that'll be, or whether or not they'll trade that. Because ultimately, you have a conversation next year with Isaiah Thomas, who is reportedly seeking a max deal, continues to talk about it publicly. At the Summer League game, he said, "I'm a max guy. I deserve the max, and we're just going to continue to take care of business on the court and let the cards fall where they may. I'm happy for all the guards and all the guys getting their money because they deserve it, but my time is coming. They know they've got the back of the Brinks truck out. They know that. So it is an interesting conversation with Isaiah Thomas because you got guys like Kyle Lowry with a 3-year, $100 million contract. You have Drew Holiday, you got 5 years, $126 million from the Pelicans. And with Isaiah Thomas, he's certainly worth a max contract. But what are we talking about when it comes to max? Are we talking max length and max money? Because Isaiah Thomas isn't worth that. Is he worth max money? Yes, he is. Zach Lowe of ESPN thinks that the Celtics and Isaiah could probably get a deal done anywhere from $20 to $23 million per year. Maybe a 3-year deal. Would they be willing to give him a 3-year max money deal? Probably, but a 5-year, I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think they're going to want to leverage their future behind Isaiah Thomas. I think Thomas is a great player. Deserves everything. He works hard. He's emotional. He makes shots. He helps your team out for sure. But ultimately, he's not going to be the guy who's going to be here in 4 years and be leading your team. It's going to be a guy like Tatum. It's going to be a guy like Brown. And maybe it's a guy like Marcus Smart. Marcus Smart's 23 years old. Probably one of the best defensive guards in the league right behind Avery Bradley. Marcus Smart's working hard. He's trying to work on his shot. And if he can be a consistent scorer, Marcus Smart might be that guy to run the point for you. Might be that guard. Might be an all-star guard one day. He's only 23. 3 years' time, 26. Prime of his career right there, 26, 27, 28, 29. And Marcus Smart. Who knows what could happen with him? So in reality, I did like the idea of drafting Markelle Fultz because I liked the idea of him being the long-term starting guard. Maybe they'll do it with the 18th pick. Maybe they'll draft the guard there, and they probably should. Because outside of Isaiah Thomas, you have Terry Rozier, who might be on the way out. You have Nader, who they just signed. But you don't really have much. There's not really much at the guard for the Boston Celtics. You need someone who can create plays. And Isaiah Thomas will be that this year for sure. And they should sign him to an extension. But the fact is, their surgery is still on the table. Danny Ainge said today that they'll have a reevaluation of Isaiah at the end of the month. He says, I'm feeling better. I'm taking step forward as my goal, but he hasn't actually got back on the court yet. He hasn't been able to play basketball. There's a lot of questions with him. And I'm not taking away from what he did last year. He was a big part of getting them to the Eastern Conference Finals. For sure. Big part of that 53-win, number 1 seed team. But down the road, is he your best option? Is he going to be the guy here for 18? Because if you look at it, if you really do think about it, their chances of beating the Golden State Warriors, as is with this team, even if Tatum and Brown overachieve, even if Smart take a massive leap forward, if everything fits perfectly, everyone's healthy, beating the Golden State Warriors or even the Cleveland Cavaliers is a tough order. That's a tough thing to talk about. Can they do it the year after? That's when you start to get in the conversation. Yes, they probably could. There could be something there. But there's no guarantees here. This wasn't the year to load up and win. You got Gordon Hayward. That's great. But it wasn't worth trading for Paul George without the guarantee of Hayward. And that tells you that Danny Ainge doesn't reasonably think that this was the year to go all out for a championship. Because if they were, I have reason to believe that they'd rather have had Avery Bradley on this team. Because their chances with Avery Bradley on the team to win are better. If they had traded Jay Crowder, their chances with Avery Bradley were better. But I don't think he's thinking this year. I think he's thinking next year. And I think that's a smart way to go. I think ultimately they're going to re-sign Thomas. I hope it's not for max length because I don't think he's that kind of player. I don't think they need that. I think they're wing play. I think guys like Brown. I think guys like Tatum. I think, Gordon Hayward. Those are going to be your guys. Marcus Smart could be your guy in terms of building around. I'm not sure if Thomas is. Thomas has been great. You've revitalized the franchise. You should be thanked for that. You should continue to play here. But when they win the title, I don't know if he's going to be at the guard position. I've been talking about this for a while. I'm not sold he's going to be here for the long term because if he really is thinking max money, he's really thinking max length, he'll get it from some team. I'm just not convinced it's the Boston Celtics. I don't think that they're going to want to leverage their future for that. He's got to remember, Marcus Smart, after this year, he has to get paid too. Are you going to let a 24-year-old guard at that time, who was right on the edge, who you reasonably invested 5 years into, walk away right before he's about to become potentially a really good guard, an all-star guard, over letting Isaiah Thomas stay? I don't know. If they're going to pick between Smart and Isaiah, I'm not sure. Because if right now, if you look at it, obviously Isaiah Thomas is worth more. He's an MVP kind of player. But he'll never win the MVP because he doesn't play defense. And he does try. He certainly does. But he's not a very good defender. With Smart, he's an elite defender. On offense, if Smart can figure that out, he's going to be more valuable to the Boston Celtics long term than Isaiah Thomas. Would you rather give the money to Smart or Thomas? And Smart's obviously going to get paid less. He's not a max guy, but he's going to get paid a lot of money. And if he gets an $80 million plus offer on the free agent market, it's going to be tough for the Celtics to match it, especially if they pick Isaiah Thomas. We're going to go on a quick break here, come back, talk more about the Boston Celtics, talk about how they might be feeling the loss of Kelly Olynyk and Jonas Jerebko. And then later on in the show, we'll talk about the Boston Bruins and the Boston Red Sox. We'll talk about Pablo Sandoval, what's going on with that, second half thoughts, and we'll have a couple people call in and give us their opinions on it. You're back with Trifecta Sports Talk here. I'm Tanner Abello, your host. It is 2:28 here on July 14th. The Boston Celtics announced today the official signing of Gordon Hayward as well as the signing of Abdel Nader, the 2016 second round pick, and Gordon Hayward being the free agent of the Utah Jazz. So we're going to kick it off and talk about the players that the Boston Celtics are moving on from. And they're moving on from Jonas Jerebko, they're moving on from Kelly Olynyk, Amir Johnson, and Avery Bradley. As well as a couple others like Jordan Mickey, and I think James Young as well, but those are really players that matter. In all honesty, they don't really matter that much. According to Adrian Wojnarowski of ESPN, formerly The Vertical, the Utah Jazz have gotten their revenge on the Boston Celtics. They signed forward Jonas Jerebko, the Swedish forward, to a 2-year contract worth $8.2 million. Everyone probably remembers Jerebko coming over from the Detroit Pistons after they traded Deshaun Prince to the Pistons for Jerebko and Gigi Datome. Also came to Boston via that trade, and then Gigi left the NBA following that season with the Boston Celtics. So Jerebko has been played in Boston for 2.5 seasons, averaged 2.8 points per game, 3.5 rebounds last season for the Boston Celtics, 78 appearances, shot 43.5% from the field. He was able to earn minutes by showing off and impressing Celtics coach Brad Stevens with his determination and hard work. He's 30 years old. He was the most efficient with the Boston Celtics when he was playing the stretch four position, and he also had the ability to hit threes in succession. He shot 37.2% from deep for the Boston Celtics. Jerebko is another one of those cap casualties that is a result of signing Gordon Hayward. Another one of those casualties is Kelly Olynyk, another big man here. Kelly Olynyk's an interesting player in the sense that he had a really big Game 7 against the Washington Wizards. This is a player that Boston Celtics drafted a couple of years ago. He's now 26 years old. They renounced his rights, making him an unrestricted free agent after they announced they were going to sign Gordon Hayward. Olynyk signed a 4-year deal with the Miami Heat worth more than $50 million. This came right after the Miami Heat missed out on Hayward. So they signed Kelly Olynyk. Maybe it's a little get back to the Boston Celtics there. He's a player option for the 4th season. Olynyk was a 13th overall pick in the 2013 NBA draft, taken by the Dallas Mavericks before he was immediately traded to the Boston Celtics. In his 4 seasons with the Boston Celtics, he averaged 9.5 points per game, 4.5 rebounds, and 20.7 minutes per game. But it all comes down to that Game 7 against the Washington Wizards that really will probably leave a mark in a lot of Celtics fans' minds. Kelly Olynyk shot 26 points to lift the Boston Celtics into the Eastern Conference Finals. It was electric, that performance. It probably one of the most memorable games of the entire playoffs was Kelly Olynyk putting the Boston Celtics on his back. And he really showed a fire in that playoff series that probably got him that contract. You know, the fact is, he probably could have made more money. I know on the open market heading into the offseason, I was kind of expecting Olynyk to get a deal worth anywhere from $12 to $15 million per year. That's just the way the NBA works for a really good role player like that. But ultimately, it's going to be a really good piece for that Miami Heat team. He's going to be playing alongside Sean Whiteside. So it should be interesting. He's probably just going to sit outside the three-point line like he always does. But Celtics will miss Kelly Olynyk. In fact, he was the best three-point shooter, the purest three-point shooter on the team, probably next to Avery Bradley. Bradley is also another guy that they lost because they had to trade him in order to get under the cap, in order to sign Gordon Hayward. They couldn't offer Gordon Hayward the contract they were offering him unless they traded a guy like Avery Bradley. And they traded him for Marcus Morris along with a second-round pick they gave up to get Morris. Avery Bradley is going to be a free agent after next year, and that's really the reason why Danny Ainge moved on from him. He was worried he was just going to leave or be too much for them to afford. And ultimately, Avery Bradley's probably going to get paid anywhere from $20 to $25 million next year in free agency. And he's worth it. That's the kind of player he is. That's kind of the way the NBA is going. Even with durability questions, AB will get that contract. And that's something the Celtics just couldn't afford to do, and they seem to really like Jay Crowder and Crowder's contract, $6 million per year for the next 3 years, which is a bargain. It's a steal for the kind of player he is. It's gonna be interesting to see what happens with Jay Crowder, especially is he going to be willing to be on the bench, come off the bench, and that's going to be a big question for them. Or is he actually going to be in the starting lineup, play more of a power forward role with Al Horford at the center position? It's going to be really interesting to see how he gets along with Gordon Hayward as well. Last season when the Utah Jazz visited the Garden, fans were cheering for Gordon Hayward, and after the game, Jay Crowder was not happy about it. And on Twitter, a month ago, right before they, were starting to create their pitch for Gordon Hayward, Jay Crowder was liking tweets that were extremely negative towards him. So it'll be interesting to see how he feels towards Boston, how he feels towards the Celtics, how he feels towards Gordon Hayward, and if he is content to play off the bench. Because if he does force the Boston Celtics' hand here, it'll be interesting to see what happens. Because ultimately, I would have rather have had Avery Bradley, and understand why they went for Jay Crowder. Because in terms of long-term value to the team, Crowder's worth more, considering AB is probably going to walk. But they traded Avery Bradley just to get underneath that cap, and they couldn't have been offered too much because teams knew Boston had to get under the cap there. So everyone kind of had Boston by the balls there. They couldn't really do much in terms of making a move. So they got the short stick there, right there, with trading Avery Bradley and a second-round pick for Marcus Morris. Obviously, Morris has more term on his deal. He has 2 years left on that deal, where Avery Bradley only had 1. But there was many people, NBA guys, who believed that Avery Bradley was worth more in terms of a trade on an expiring contract than Isaiah Thomas. So if you look at the return they got for him, it's not even close to what it was worth, if you do believe the reports. Ultimately, they traded Kelly Olynyk. They traded Avery Bradley for Gordon Hayward, essentially. You give up a second-round pick, Avery Bradley and Kelly Olynyk, for Gordon Hayward. That's a trade you'd probably make every day of the week. So, it's definitely not a loss in terms of that. But they had other options. They certainly did. And I think they're trying to avoid a crazy cap in next year. And I think that's part of the thinking, well, we're not going to win. We're still maybe a year or two away from contending for an NBA Finals, just because Golden State's so good. That team is just so good out there. They're way above the rest of their competition. They're way above the Cleveland Cavaliers, and the Celtics aren't even at the Cavs level. They're within breathing distance, but I still don't think they're there. And there's a lot of interesting discussion to go with the Boston Celtics, because they obviously are a better team. They have the potential to be a great team this year. But in terms of winning an NBA championship, I just don't see it this year. Maybe not even next year. So that's it for our Celtics talk today. We will go and talk about the Boston Bruins after the break, talk about their lack of activity, what's going on with David Pastrnak and Ryan Spooner, and what should happen to Zdeno Chara if he chooses not to retire after next year. You're back with Trifecta Sports Talk here. I'm your host, Tanner Rebello. Today's episode is presented by Trifecta Network. That's trifectanetwork.com. It's your latest Boston sports news and updates, analysis, headlines, and coverage of Boston sports games. So we're kicking off here on heading towards that second hour of the show here. It's 2:44 on July 14th. And we're going to talk about the Boston Bruins. The Boston Bruins have been very quiet this offseason. In fact, scarily quiet, and I think that's a good thing in part. I think part of it's a bad thing because Brian Spooner and David Pastrnak are still unsigned. And there's a tight gap to actually sign these players in terms of the money they're able to offer them. So I ultimately think it's a great idea for them to be slow, to not really make a big move. Because when they make big moves, they make big mistakes. Last year, they pulled the trigger on veteran forward David Backes, who's on the wrong side of 30 on a 5-year deal. Just a bad move, and we've seen it with this team. You look at David Krejci. David Krejci is the highest paid Bruins player, $7.25 million this year. He's your second-line center, and ultimately, he isn't playing up to it. He's not even playing at a $5 million player level. In fact, if he was around $4 million, that's when you'd start to feel good about him. David Krejci had a bad year last year. He's not really recovered from his hip injury. So this is the Bruins team that is notorious for handing out these big, long deals to players who are beyond the ridge. Players who no longer are capable of playing up to their top level. You know, they gave Brad Marchand a long deal last year, and they needed to. Brad Marchand needed to get signed, and ultimately I think the deal was probably 2 years too much. The money was fine for Brad Marchand. Patrice Bergeron was another long-term lockup, and they had to sign Bergie as well, and that contract's okay too. But you look at Tuukka Rask, you know, they gave a goaltender a long deal. And ultimately, I think as you move on and that contract gets older and older, you'll see more players and goaltenders get signed to higher deals. I think right now, as it sits, he's tied for third or fourth highest paid goaltender in the league. I think he does fourth next year, third this year, because Carey Price's extension doesn't kick in until next season. So I think as Tuukka develops and as he gets older, I think his contract will less worse as goaltender salaries just increase in general. But ultimately, they still gave him too long of a contract because you don't really want to lock yourself into a goaltender. Because in the NHL, the way goaltenders work is you have 2 or 3 years of really excellent play, and then there's the breaking point where they kind of just go downhill. You know, obviously, that's not always the case. You know, with players, Roberto Luongo is a guy who probably breaks that trend. Henrik Lundqvist has kind of broke the trend. Carey Price is kind of breaking that trend. But ultimately, as a whole, they kind of fall off the cliff. With Tuukka Rask, it's hard to say that he's not played up to that contract because if you look at the defense in front of him, it hasn't been that great. I know last year, if you look at the stats, he ranks towards the middle half of the league in terms of goaltenders, 10 to 15 range in terms of a lot of key goaltending statistics. But in front of him, you know, his best defenseman, Zdeno Chara, who was 39 years old last year. He's going to be 40 this year. So Tuukka gets a break in my mind. You know, do I think he was overpaid? Yes. Was it a bad contract? Yes. But with Tuukka Rask, you look at the defense in front of him. Ever since, Andrew Fence left in 2013, you had Johnny Boychuk 3 years ago to get traded. The defense hasn't been there. You know, Dennis Seidenberg isn't there anymore. Towards the end of his career, he wasn't as effective anyway. Dougie Hamilton's not there anymore. You have guys in front of him like Torrey Krug who aren't really very good defensive players. Chara's not as quick as he once was. He makes a lot of mistakes now in his old age. Brandon Carlo was a rookie last year. You're going to have Charlie McAvoy this year, who's a rookie as well. You know, this is a team that hasn't played well defensively. So if you look at Tuukka's numbers, you kind of have to cut him a little bit of a break. How much do you want to blame the defense is up to you. But ultimately, I think part of the reason why he hasn't had the greatest success is that. You know, I put some of the blame on him. I think he tends to give up late in games. I think in overtimes and in shootouts, you see him just give up on the game. And I think that's partially because he doesn't believe that much into those teams. At times, I think he gave up. But ultimately, I think he's been fine because the defense hasn't been that good in front of him. If he gets a good defense, you know, maybe you have something to talk about there. But ultimately, this year, I don't think they're going to be great defensively. I think, you know, Chara's going to be 40 years old. What do you get out of him? I thought at 39 years old, Zdeno Chara was actually very good for you. He was a legit top 4 last year. Top 2? Not really. This year, I expect him to be a really solid top 4 player. You know, I think he knows how to manage the old age thing. The key is keeping his minutes down. That's kind of something that Bruce Cassidy's going to have a lot of trouble with because I think they've tried to limit his minutes in the past and they just ultimately can't. Just the way it works out in terms of just not being very good in depth wise. Adam McQuaid's a good defensive defenseman to have. Kevin Miller as well. What are you going to get out of Brandon Carlo? What are you going to get out of Charlie McAvoy? These are two young defensemen who, might not be the only guys up there. Robbie O'Gara might be up there. Matt Grzelcyk might be up there at some point. So you really look at the Bruins defense, and you'll have some veteran players there, but you don't really know. You're going to see some mistakes out of guys like Carlo and McAvoy and other rookies who end up playing up there this year because that's what happens. That's what you get. That's what you expect out of those kind of players. They're going to make some mistakes. And ultimately, it'll be their fault and less on Rask. But it is interesting to talk about Tuukka and to see if that contract is worth what it is, and I think it is worth it. I think it will get better over time, just because that's the way the league goes. Ultimately, that might be seen as a pretty good contract to make. Just like when the Celtics re-signed Avery Bradley in the NBA, I think it was a $12 million per year deal. That's looked like as a bargain now. Just the way the world works, the way sports work, the way salary caps go up and salaries go up. So I envision that Tuukka contract looking okay towards the end. Just like Zdeno Chara. Zdeno Chara was getting paid $8 million a year a couple years ago. Now it's getting paid $4 million. It's all in the contract structure, so it's not too bad. But this offseason's been a little bit interesting. They've been very quiet. And part of that's because they don't really have that much room to work with. $12.8 million is the cap space as of right now. That's after they re-signed Tim Schaller, Noel Acciari. They signed the AHL MVP Kenneth Agostino to a one-year $825,000 deal. You signed Paul Pastamo, a 28-year-old right shot defenseman worth $725,000. So those are the moves that they've made, other than their draft picks. Ultimately, AHL MVP Agostino. There's a reason why the St. Louis Blues didn't re-sign him. Sure, he's a great AHL player, but is he going to make that jump to the NHL? I don't really know. I see a lot of Bruins fans are always really pumped up on players like this, players who've had success in the AHL, guys who've had success in college or juniors, and it doesn't always add up. You can be very high on a couple prospects, but it doesn't always mean they're going to be great players. You saw Malcolm Subban, who was supposed to be a really good goaltending prospect and that really panned out. Maybe Daniel Vladar will be a prospect that pans out for you. Maybe Zane McIntyre gets another shot. Maybe something's there. But ultimately, you don't really know what you're going to get at prospects, but I think that's what the Bruins are riding on right now. I think Don Sweeney's done a really good job at acquiring prospects through the draft. He's done an excellent job at doing that. And I think it's time to see what you got here. Find out if Pastrnak is going to take that step forward. Frank Petrano is going to take that step forward. See what you really have at a Carlo, McAvoy, or Pekka Karlsson. If he ends up starting the year at the NHL level, I don't know. What are you going to get out of O'Gara? What is a Lawson? What is an Anders Bork? There's tons of players. If you go up and down the list of all these prospects or guys who have played in the NHL but haven't really had that time or haven't really peaked yet. So there's a lot of Bruins players that you can see a lot of upside with. Question is, what happens? Ultimately, you don't really know. You don't know how a guy's going to pan out because I can give you stories in every sport where you had a prospect who is going to be the next big thing. The next Wayne Gretzky. You don't see it. It doesn't always happen because that's just the way sports work ultimately. So they've been quiet, and I think part of the reason why they've been quiet is because they've been trying to re-sign Ryan Spooner and David Pastrnak. Ryan Spooner went into arbitration with the Boston Bruins, rumored to be around $3 million a year in terms of his salary. David Pastrnak, on the other hand, $5 to $7 million range. I've seen some really dumb Bruins fans who think he's not worth that. But the fact is, when you're 21 years old, when you're scoring 30-plus goals a year, that is what you're worth. In fact, that's just the way sports work. The NBA, if this was the NBA, David Pastrnak getting paid like $20+ million a year, but it's not. It's hockey. So $5 to $7 million a year, that's what Pasternak's worth. You got to lock him up. He's 21 years old still. Something like that's insane. He came in the league at 18. Pastrnak has to get signed long term. So the issue is the Bruins only have about $2 to $4 million in terms of cap room. If you're already factoring in Spooner and Pastrnak who have yet to be re-signed, and it is worrisome the longer it takes for them to re-sign these two players. But I look at it as Pastrnak and Spooner are guys you have to re-sign. Spooner not really though. In my mind, I think It's weird. He's a natural-born center, but you have Patrice Bergeron, you have David Krejci, and you have David Backes. Backes, who they tried to throw up on a wing last year, did not work. His natural position is a centerman, and he's been doing it very successful in his career up until Boston. So I think you should have David Backes as your third-line center to start the year. And does that mean Ryan Spooner is going to get paid $3 million to play on the fourth-line center? No. The fourth-line center should be like Noel Acciari, in my mind. Is Spooner out on the wing? I don't think that works as well. So Spooner's a guy I would have been fine walking away or trading in some kind of form. I think he's a fine player. I don't think he projects any higher than a third-line guy. I think that's just who he is, what he's going to be. I don't think there's any more ceiling there for him. I think you've seen the best out of Ryan Spooner. I think statistically he'll have better years ahead of him. I just think you know what he is. And I'm not sure you have the room in your system to have him here. I'm not sure you want him to be on a third-line wing. Because I think Backes should be on that third-line center. I really do, because if you're running a centerman position where you have a Patrice Bergeron, David Krejci, really don't know what you're going to get. But in that David Backes there, if you have a Backes, Bergeron, Krejci, 1, 2, 3, that's a really good position in terms of having players who can create opportunities for your wings. And I think you could even see Krejci get bumped down to that third line. He's getting paid so much money. It's impossible to say that, but he's been getting paid so much money. But, maybe Backes should be your second-line center. Maybe that should happen. With Krejci, it's tough. Ever since Milan Lucic was traded to LA, you haven't really seen Krejci become comfortable. They've tried to throw Vetrano up on that wing. Backes was up there. He really needs a power forward. And that's why that $2 to $4 million in terms of play money here, after they re-signed Pastrnak and Spooner, I would like to see them use it to get a power forward. A guy like Thomas Vanek, a veteran winger who fills that Milan Lucic role, probably makes Krejci feel comfortable. I think that's what he needs. I don't think you need to he doesn't play well with young guys. Because the issue with David Krejci is he's not a slow guy, but he plays slow. That's his game. He's a slow-moving center. He can make plays, make stuff happen, but ultimately you need to put a winger out there that fits his pace of play. And, Backes, you tried him there. Backes didn't look it at the wing. You don't really have anything in your system that could really fit there. Maybe Matt Bolesky could fit there on that wing, but Matt Bolesky hasn't really had success with the Boston Bruins in 2 seasons here after coming off a career year with the Anaheim Ducks. He gave him a ridiculous contract. So I think you signed Thomas Vanek to a 1-year deal worth, say $2 to $3 million. Throw him up on that wing with David Krejci to start the year. You basically tell a guy like Frank Vetrano, go prove it, buddy. And maybe he proves himself, and maybe he earns that way to get up into that top 6-4 role, plays up on the wing with David Krejci. And then Vanek is still going to be a really good player on the third line wing. Maybe it's Spooner or Backes centering him. There's a lot of interesting possibilities for the Boston Bruins team. I think they are a playoff team. I think that should be the expectations going to this year. Depending on how the Eastern Conference plays out, can they win a round? Yeah, they should have won a round this past year. They should have beat the Ottawa Senators. Not a question in my mind. The fact is, Erik Karlsson was playing out of his mind. Erik Karlsson was probably the best player I've ever seen play against the Boston Bruins in a playoff series. It was absolutely insane. Ultimately, it cost the Bruins a playoff series there. But I think their goal should be to make the playoffs. And if, say, Carlo takes that step forward, say Pastrnak continues to grow, you have a St. Bergeron and Martian, David Krejci comes back to what he normally is. Guys like McAvoy, Karlsson kind of show up on the scene and they're very effective. This Boston Bruins team could win a playoff round, maybe even 2. I mean, it's crazy to say that, but there's so much unknown in terms of the young players, a lot of room for development, and it's actually really exciting here. A couple months ago, I came to the realization I'm more excited for the Boston Bruins and their young talent than the Boston Celtics. After they drafted Tatum, it kind of shifted a little bit, but this Boston Bruins team, there's a reason to be really excited because they could be really good for years to come. They have tons of prospects. You're bound to have at least 2, 3, or 4 of them actually turn out to be NHL players. And I think McAvoy is the real deal. I think Rebecca Karlsson's the real deal. I think Carlo is the real deal. I think Pastrnak can continue to get better and better and better. This Boston Bruins team, they could really explode this year in terms of being a legit NHL team. The Edmonton Oilers went from being a basement team and one player, obviously Connor McDavid's phenomenal. He's the highest paid player in the NHL now. But from 1 year, you can make that shift. You can turn into a really good team in the NHL in 1 year. And I really do look at this Boston Bruins team and the potential that they do have. And if Tuukka Rask can kind of be a shell of a Vezina Trophy winner that he is, the sky really is the limit for this Boston Bruins team. I'm sitting here on July 14th. A lot of things can happen. A lot of things can change, obviously. I don't really know what the lines are going to look like. I don't know what the pairing is going to look like. I don't know what you're going to get out of a lot of these players, but that's kind of really the fun in it. Because I think ultimately the minimum goal should be to make the playoffs. But, I could envision them actually being a contender. Maybe not for a Stanley Cup, but for an Eastern Conference Finals team, I can envision it. And obviously, I sit here in July and say this, and a lot can change, but there really is a lot of potential for growth to this Boston Bruins team, and it is a reason to be really excited. We're going to go on a quick break here. Done with the Boston Bruins talk. We're done with the Boston Celtics talk. And we're going to move on to the Boston Red Sox, the only major Boston sports team that is currently playing games. And they have a series starting tonight with the New York Yankees at home at Fenway Park. Welcome back to Trifecta Sports Talk here. Got some breaking news coming out of the Boston Bruins camp before we get to Red Sox talk. The Bruins have announced that they have signed goaltenders Zane McIntyre and Malcolm Subban to 2-year, two-way contracts apiece. Both contracts are worth $650,000 at the NHL level. McIntyre, who was 24 years old, appeared in 31 games for the Providence Bruins last year. He had a 21-6-1 record with a 2.03 goals against average and a 930 save percentage. He actually led the AHL in save percentage and ranked second in goals against average. With Subban, Subban's 23 years old. He appeared in 32 games for the Providence Bruins during the 2016-17 season. He posted an 11-14-1 record, 2.41 goals against average, and a 917 save percentage. He appeared for one game, actually, for the Bruins in the 2016-17 campaign. You know, he had an injury with Malcolm Subban. I know a lot of people probably aren't too excited about Malcolm Subban being re-signed for the Boston Bruins to a 2-year deal. But ultimately, he's a former first-round pick. He's still 23 years old, so he's still really young. And they're not about to give up on him. That's just not the way it would work. So, with Zane McIntyre, it's a really good re-sign for them. Potentially could be their starting goaltender of the future, or at least the backup. With Malcolm Subban, you don't really know what you're going to get still. I think he's not going to pan out, but ultimately they had to make that move just because he is a former first, and the price is meaningless to them. That's a very cheap price for him, and that's fine. Ultimately, is it going to take away time from other goaltenders in Providence? Yeah, maybe. But there's still a chance for him to turn it around. And it was a no-brainer really to re-sign Malcolm Subban. So we're going to talk Boston Red Sox baseball. We're coming off the All-Star break. You have a 3-game set here at Fenway Park against the New York Yankees. This is the team that is 3.5 games in back of you going into the second half. So I'm going to recap the first half of the season, give some player grades for players on the 25-man roster, and then talk about 5 things to look for going forward into the first couple weeks of the first half. We'll talk about the third base position and how they're making a flurry of moves. And then I'll talk about what they should do heading in to the MLB trade deadline, which is actually coming up. And we've already had some moves in Major League Baseball, including a trade by the Chicago White Sox to the Chicago Cubs for Jose Quintana. The Cubs gave up a ton for Quintana, and I think it was actually a bad move for Theo Epstein. But we're going to go through some Red Sox player grades, the midseason edition of it, starting off with the starting pitchers. Chris Sale had an 18-game started in the first half, 11-4 record, 2.75 ERA. He had 178 strikeouts, led the majors in that category. He also had a .90 whip, led the American League in that category. Sale continues to be one of the better Boston Red Sox pitchers. He had a really bad month of May. He had a 4.24 ERA, but in the month of June, he had a 2.78. And so far, 2 starts into July, he has a 2.57 ERA. And he started the All-Star game for the American League. Chris Sale actually starts Game 2 of the series against the New York Yankees on Saturday afternoon. But I give him an A. I give Chris Sale an A for the first half. That's not even a hard question. Rick Porcello started 19 games in the first half for the Boston Celtics. He had a 4-11 record, 4.75 ERA, 119 innings pitched, 109 strikeouts. The reigning Cy Young winner wasn't good. His sinker ball wasn't really working for him. He did start to get a little bit better as of late. And I give him a C- for the first half. David Price, another former Cy Young winner, had a 3.91 ERA in 9 games started, 4-2 record, 53 innings pitched, 50 strikeouts, 1.26 whip. He showed some ability to be a capable starter for the Boston Red Sox. Ultimately, he gets a C+. But if he can continue to pitch the way he did towards the end as well, that number could continue to rise for him. Drew Palmer has been fantastic for the Boston Red Sox. He had 17 games started, 9-4 record, 3.60 ERA ever since he had that fight with John Farrell in the dugout in Oakland. He's been phenomenal. Probably one of the best pitchers in baseball since that fight. He's had 90 innings pitched, 98 strikeouts, 1.36 whip. And ultimately, in my opinion, has been the best pitcher in the Red Sox rotation, even better than Chris Sale in the last month. Another member of the 25-man rotation is Doug Fister. How long he'll be there? Probably not that long, with Eduardo Rodriguez likely taking his spot very soon. But Doug Fister had 3 games pitched, 6.14 ERA. He got incomplete because didn't pitch enough for me to give him a rating. Relief pitchers, talk about Matt Barnes first. Matt Barnes appeared in 41 games for the Boston Red Sox, 3.57 ERA, 40.1 innings pitched, 49 strikeouts. Primarily was used in the 8th inning, but he had a lot of struggles on the road, pushing him back into the 7th inning by John Farrell. Started the season nice, 3.27 ERA in April, but then in May he had a 4.26 ERA, and then in May he had a in June he had a 3.46 ERA. Having a solid end of the month in June. I give him a C. Fernando Abad, he had a really good start to the year, but as of late, he's been really poor for the Boston Red Sox. But I still think he performed better in the first half than I expected him to. He had 27 games pitched, 2.93 ERA, 27 and 2/3 innings. I give him a B. Blaine Boyer, another guy I didn't really expect much. He's a 35-year-old journeyman. Only started pitching in Boston since May 28th, but in June he posted a 2.16 ERA. He was phenomenal. Best filled for non-pressure situations, but he ended up throwing 17 games, 3.13 ERA for Boston, 23 innings pitched, 20 strikeouts. Heath Hembree is one of the most used relievers in the Boston Red Sox bullpen. He pitched 40 games, 3.57 ERA, 40.1 innings pitched, 44 strikeouts for him. He had a phenomenal April, 1.42 ERA, but in May he kind of ballooned up, 5.93 ERA. In June he kind of settled back down, 3.38. Finished the first half with 3.57. He should be used as a specialist pitcher. That's what he is. And hopefully John Farrell will only use him against left-handed batters. And against lefties this year, he has a 2.35 ERA. Move on to Robbie Scott. Robbie Scott has been brutal for the Boston Red Sox as of late. At 36 games pitched. He's a 4.09 ERA on the year, 22 innings pitched in total, 17 strikeouts. He gets a D-. Joe Kelly, the starter turned reliever, has been absolutely electric. Did he give up a run in May or June? Gave up a run, I think, in the series against Tampa Bay, but that was 2 months of no-run baseball. Pitched 34 games with the Boston Red Sox, 1.49 ERA, 36 in the 3rd innings pitched, 26 strikeouts for Joe Kelly. I give him an A. He's been absolutely electric. Question is what he's going to do in terms of when the pressure is on him, and that's kind of the question that might make the Boston Red Sox trade for a reliever. Go on to the closer here to finish out the reliever category here. Craig Kimbrell has been absolutely electric. He was an all-star again this year. He has 23 saves already, 36 games he's appeared in, 1.19 ERA, and 37.2 innings pitched. He's had 68 strikeouts. Been absolutely phenomenal. Move on to the catcher spot here. You got Sandy Leon and Christian Vasquez. Sandy Leon and Christian Vasquez actually both get a C here. Both have about 160 at-bats. You have Sandy Leon batting .244, 5 homers and 22 ribbies. You have Christian Vasquez batting .267 with 1 home run and 17 ribbies. Both get a C. Christian Vasquez has actually really struggled of late. Last time I actually did a ranking. He was batting in the 290s. Now he's batting .267. So he's kind of fallen a bit here. Go in the infield, we got Xander Bogaerts, the shortstop for the Boston Red Sox. He has 320 at-bats. That is the most at-bats on the Boston Red Sox, I believe. Let me just check. Mookie Betts at 353. So actually second most. So you got Xander. I give him an A. He had a 303 average in the first half, 6 home runs, 41 RBIs, 806 OPS. He's been very effective, very consistent. Power numbers aren't there yet. He has kind of failed a little bit as of late to show consistency. I think his average was at 330 going into June, and now it's down to 303. Still fantastic, but still some room for improvement from Xander Bogaerts. Devin Marrero, one of the third base platoon guys. He has 129 at-bats, batting .225. Much better of late. 3 home runs, 20 RBIs. Not a very offensive-minded player, but he's the best defensive player in the Red Sox organization. I give him a C. If I was going to judge him in the last month, I'd probably give him a B+, but you get to see for the overall first half. Mitch Moreland, first baseman for the Boston Red Sox, signed a 1-year deal this past year. He's more of a gap contract in terms of getting the Sam Travis to be your franchise first baseman, but Mitch Moreland's actually exceeded the contract in my mind of what he's been getting paid in terms of what he's produced. 292 at-bats, pretty much played every game. 257 average, 12 home runs, 41 RBIs. Played with the foot injury there. John Farrell really liked that and kind of rubbed it in his team's face in terms of this player's willing to play through something and play through it and actually play pretty well. Dustin Pedroia, 277 at-bats, 303 average, 4 home runs, 41 RBIs for the Boston Red Sox in the first half. He gets an E- from me. Still some room for improvement. I think there's still some room for Pedroia to actually play better, which is insane. He's actually had a really good year. Sam Travis, he gets an incomplete. Only has 40 at-bats, 275 average. Twice Lynn, another third base platoon guy, 39 at-bats, got called up right from Portland. 333 average, 2 RBIs. Give him an incomplete as well. Go to the outfield here. Start off with Andrew Benintendi, the rookie. 305 at-bats for the Boston Red Sox, 279 average, 12 home runs, 51 RBIs, 9 stolen bases, 903 OPS, which is fantastic. He had a really rough May at a 204 average, but he's really bounced back. Ultimately, he still has a lot to prove and a lot to show this season, so I give him a B. Mookie Betts also gets a B here as well. That's an MVP kind of player, but I think he's kind of been a little slow and consistent. He's only batting 272. He does have 16 home runs, 53 RBIs, as well as 15 stolen bases and 353 at-bats. But with Mookie, I expect that average to be up in the upper 280s and 290s there. That's 272 is not acceptable. He needs to get more base hits. Jackie Bradley Jr., give him a B+. He's batting 280, 12 home runs, 38 RBIs, and 257 at-bats. His career average is 242, so he's batting 40 points higher than that. He's been fantastic in center field for the Boston Red Sox. He gets a B+. Chris Young gets a C+ here for me as 153 at-bats, 255 average, 4 home runs, 17 RBIs. And, he's been fine, but the utility player can be a little bit better for the Boston Red Sox, maybe drive the ball a little bit more. Move to the DH spot here as we finish up the grades for the midseason. Hanley Ramirez, I give him a C. He has 272 at-bats this year, 261 average, 13 home runs, 34 RBIs, 794 OPS. Ultimately, he's playing better ever since they told him that he can't hit against lefties. So he is hitting better for sure, but still not up to par. And hopefully he'll start the second half as hot as he ended the first half. Going to talk about the MLB trade deadline, 5 things to watch coming up. But first I want to talk about the third base position for the Boston Red Sox. You have Lynn and Marrero, who have been really working that position in the last couple of weeks and really solidified and stabilized that position. We had Pablo Sandoval get on a 10-day DL with an inner ear infection, and now Pablo Sandoval has been DFA'd by the Boston Red Sox. So he's out of the picture. Johnny Peralta was signed, the MLB veteran that was let go by the St. Louis Cardinals. Played in Pawtucket for a couple games, and he was actually released as well. So it looks like it is going to be Lynn and Marrero for the foreseeable future. You do have Brock Holt on the horizon. Brock Holt was rehabbing in Portland, then he was rehabbing in Pawtucket. Every time he's tried to rehab back, he's had, some vertigo symptoms, suffering from his concussion. So you don't really know where you're going to get at Brock Holt or when he's actually going to come back, but ultimately he seems close. He seems good, seems in the right mindset, and, maybe Lynn or Marrero will move on once Holt comes back up. You have Josh Rutledge, who's also starting his rehab assignment relatively shortly as well. So you have 2 utility infielders who can play third base on the horizon. So if Lynn and Marrero struggle, you do have some options there for Boston. I don't think they're going to make a trade for a third baseman. Maybe they trade for a guy like Todd Frazier at the Chicago White Sox. I was hearing, I think one of the reporters I was talking to said that he thinks you could probably get Todd Frazier on one of your minor league relievers, maybe an Austin Maddox type or maybe Brandon Workman or something like that might get it done for you. Maybe that's worth it. I don't really think it is. I think you're better off holding on to that. I think the best bet in the trade market is probably going to be getting a reliever, but I'll talk about that a little bit later. So Johnny Peralta's gone. Pablo Sandoval's gone. Pablo Sandoval never had really any success for the Boston Red Sox. He missed all of last year for the most part. He played the year before that. He only played in 161 games for the Boston Red Sox in 3 seasons, 237 average, 286 on base percentage. His OPS was 646. He had 14 home runs. Defensively, he was really bad as well. He gave up 18 runs. In terms of playing third base, he had a negative 2.6 wins above replacement, according to Fangraphs. $95 million contract. Only provided $22 million of on-the-field value. In his latest rehab stint with the Pawtucket Red Sox, he went 13-52 and had 1 extra base hit and 3 RBIs. Just really, nothing has really worked out for Pablo Sandoval and the Boston Red Sox. Maybe it's because he doesn't care as much, but I think he does. I saw him in Pawtucket. He seemed upbeat. He seemed like he was trying. In his last rehab start, he really did try. Maybe that's not good enough and probably isn't. Maybe I think he's more of a cancer to the Boston Red Sox than he is a solution. But ultimately, I think he really did try here towards the end. I think he tried really hard to get into shape, and I think it just didn't work out. The Boston Red Sox are on the hook for a lot of money with Pablo Sandoval here. This was a failure, a very big failure for Ben Cherington. And it's right up there. I think it's worse than the Carl Crawford signing. I think it might be one of the worst free agent signings or busts of all time for baseball in terms of the amount of money they paid and what they ended up getting for him. Pablo Sandoval, he's gotten made fun of a lot in his time in Boston. Either his weight, the way he's played. He had situations where his belt burst when he was playing, which I agree is humorous. He had the situation where he was on Instagram when he was in the bathroom in the dugout. Nothing ever really panned out here for him or the Red Sox. And ultimately, I look at that third base slot, and over the years, it just never really has been solidified. You've never really had a long-term option at third base. In the past couple of years, we've had Pablo Sandoval. Travis Shaw kind of played there last year a bit. You had Will Middlebrooks there at one point. You had Adrian Beltre, who was there for a short time as well. You have Mike Lowell, who was there for a couple of years. I mean, you can just go back and back and back here. Xander Bogaerts tried a year there. You just look at that position if you're Boston, and you can't help just feel like you've never been able to put someone there, ever. The last player that really played an extended period of time at third base for the Boston Red Sox was Wade Boggs. I'm pretty sure. I got to look this up, but that position has been really in turmoil for decades. You've had periods of really good players there. Really good players who have played there since Wade Boggs. Obviously, I had Kevin Youkilis play a lot of time there as well. But a couple years back, I think the shortstop role was one that since no more Garcia-Parra, they hadn't been able to really fill. Then they got Xander Bogaerts, and it looks like you have something there. Obviously you do. He's batting over 300. It's been fantastic, but the third base role has really been something you haven't been able to fill with a long-term player. I'm looking at all-time third baseman right now, and we can go through the list right here. Adrian Beltre played the 2010 season there. He was a great player, but that was it. Wade Boggs played from 1982 to 1992. So he played for a decade. Well, let's see if we can find a player who's at least played 5 years at that position for the Boston Red Sox. And I don't think I'm going to find one here. I can't picture anybody. Shea Hillenbrand played there for 2 seasons. Aaron Hill, parts of last year. Jose Iglesias, he played from 2009 to 2013, but not really. That's when he broke in, and then when he left. Will Middlebrooks was there for 4 years, but didn't really play for 4 years at third base. And I'm talking about starting third baseman here. Bill Mueller, 2003 to 2005, only 2 years technically. It really just a whole of a position for this team. Pablo Sandoval, 3 years. Josh Rutledge, 2 years. Travis Shaw, 3 seasons, but really only 1.5 if you really want to boil it down a little bit. The position really, really hasn't been good for the Boston Red Sox. Kevin Youkilis, I guess you can say, he played from 2004 to 2012 for the Boston Red Sox, but most of that time was at first base. He did play some time at third, so it wasn't a complete kind of wash, I guess. It's really interesting looking at third base for the Boston Red Sox. Their inability to really find a player to lock down that position for multiple seasons, it's kind of crazy, actually. Hopefully it is Rafael Devers. Maybe it's Michael Chavis down in Portland. Devers was actually called up today to Pawtucket Red Sox, and I'm looking at Mike Lowell right now. Mike Lowell played from 2006 to 2010, 4 seasons for the Boston Red Sox. He was a really good player. He had 5th in the MVP in 2007 when they won the World Series. He was an All-Star. He batted 324 that year, 274 the next year, 290 the following year, and then 2010 he batted 239. Only played 73 games at 36 years old. I'm trying to really think about a Red Sox third baseman that's had a long-term position with the team and had success with it. I literally can't think of anybody since 1992 and Wade Boggs. And it's crazy when you think about it. It really is insane. There's no other way to put it. They just haven't had success at that position in a long time in terms of a long-term option there. We've had some really good seasons from certain players who had really good time. It could have been Travis Shaw, sure. Travis Shaw could have been your long-time third baseman. But it is kind of scary. They haven't been able to fill that role. And if you look at first base, it's kind of the same way. Ever since Kevin Youkilis left the team, we had Adrian Gonzalez there, Hanley Maris there for a short time, Travis Shaw, Mitch Moreland's now there for a one-year deal. Maybe it's going to be Sam Travis for the extendable future. But it is kind of weird. It ultimately really is weird. They haven't been really able to produce a lot of third basemen. And really, maybe it was Wade Boggs. Maybe that was the longest tenured third baseman for a long time. And I'm not, he was there for 10 years. I'm just trying to find a player that was there for 5 years and was very effective for 5 years and really locked down the position. And I couldn't find one. Most I found was 3 seasons there, 4 seasons maybe with Mike Lowell, where he really only played 3.5 years. So, what's interesting, it really is when you talk about this Boston Red Sox team and their inability to really lock up that third base role. Is Lennon Marrero really your best option for a long term here for the rest of the season? I don't know. Brock Holt going to come back? I don't know. I hope he does. I hope he gets over this vertigo system thing. It really sucks for him, but that's a tough position. You don't need to have all-stars at every position. Let me be clear with that. You don't. You don't need an electric catcher who can hit. San Leon, Christian Vasquez aren't really hitting that well right now, but that's fine. You have guys like Mookie Betts, Xander Bogaerts, Cesar Pedroia, Andrew Benintendi. You have capable players who can hit for you. You don't really need to have an all-star at every position. But you need a capable shortstop who can play the field, like Devin Marrero. Brock Holt can play third base pretty well as well. I watched him play this past Sunday at third base for the Pawtucket Red Sox, and he was effective. He looked fine. His bat hasn't really been there. His timing's still a little bit off. So who knows, really? He should be ready soon, I would hope. He did get some pretty good contact on Sunday. I watched him for 3 games this past weekend with Brock Holt. And Sunday, he started to look like he was more on time with the way he was reading the pitcher and the way he was swinging and everything. He looked better. But I don't really know what you're going to get out of him. I think Lynn's going to come back down to earth. I think Marrero offensively is playing out of his mind right now. And I do like Devin Marrero. Don't get me wrong. He's actually a really nice guy. And I think ultimately, maybe a 230, 240 career hitter at the major league level. I think he could potentially put that together. But I think for a major league third baseman, I think you should expect 260 to 270 average at least. You technically want someone there who can hit for power as well. A guy like Travis Shaw would have been perfect, right? But you do want someone who is contributing offensively at that position. Historically, you really do need somebody who's capable at least there. And Brock Holt, even at his peak, even if he's healthy, he's a guy that really isn't built to play long term. We've seen him have really good success with Boston, but ultimately, once he gets overplayed, he's not an everyday player, and he starts to be ineffective after a certain period of time. So you're still going to need a guy like Marrero or Lynn to spell him out. Josh Rutledge is another guy. He wasn't playing very well before he got injured, and that's because he was pretty much playing every day. He was like the everyday first baseman. Third baseman. Sorry, I apologize. So really, this Red Sox team has a lot of questions with third base. I think moving on from Peralta made sense. I think moving on from Sandoval, I thought he was going to get another shot here, but that it still makes sense. That contract has been a failure, and he doesn't do you any favors by having him on your roster at the moment. I think Marrero and Lynn should definitely get the platoon role going forward, and we'll see what happens with them and see ultimately what they can do in the second half here. I think Holt will probably get the starting job, and Rutledge maybe too, down the road here. So we'll see what happens. I don't think they're going to make a trade for a third baseman, but we'll talk about MLB trade deadline coming up after the break, though, and give a full breakdown of what the Boston Red Sox should do going forward. You're back with Trifecta Sports Talk here. It is Friday, July 14th, and we are talking Boston Red Sox baseball up until 4 o'clock here. And going to kick it off talking about the Major League Baseball trade deadline before we end up the show here. That's in a couple weeks here in July. And a lot of people are talking about the third base spot. A lot of people are talking about the potentially adding a reliever here in Boston. And I think ultimately the spot they should work in is at the reliever. But first, I'll tell you why they shouldn't actually go out and trade for a third baseman. So post Pablo Sandoval DL. So post before he got put on the 10-day DL with the inner infection, this is what the Red Sox numbers have done at third base in the American League. Their batting average at third base since Pablo Sandoval was put on the DL, 484. That's first in the American League. OBP, 514, first in the American League. Slugging percentage, 516. That is seventh in the American League. OPS, 1.030, third in the American League. And they have 15 base hits since Pablo Sandoval was put on the DL. That is first in the American League. So as you can see, this Morero-Lynn combination is working well. You have Brock Holt on the horizon. Like I said prior, I don't know what you're going to get out of Brock Holt. And he's not really a long-term option at third base because in my mind, he's a very good, if not elite utility infielder, but not an everyday option. That's not just that he hasn't been effective at it. That's just facts. Rafael Devers is batting over 300 with Portland, getting called up to the Pawtucket Red Sox. Defensively, he's not there yet. He still isn't there yet defensively. With Devers, it's tough. He has soft hands. He has a good arm, a strong arm, actually. But, scouts have always said about Rafael Devers is he going to translate major leagues, third base? They don't know. And I question it, too. And the fact that he's had a lot of struggles this year, he needs time. And maybe in AAA he'll be able to figure it out at third base, but he's not going to be an option this year at third base with the Boston Red Sox. He will not be a defensive option for them. I think you're better off with Devin Morero and Lynn, and Rutledge will come back, and Brock Holt will come back hopefully, and we'll see what we have there. But I don't think it's worth going out to trade for a guy like Todd Frazier. I certainly don't think it's worth going out and trading for anybody more expensive than him. I think it's not worth trading assets for. I think you should not be trading for an expiring contract at third base. I do not think it is worth your time because I think you can get by with what you have. I think Morero and Lynn and Rutledge and Holt can get you by here. I don't think it's worth trading. I think if you're going to use any assets this year to trade, I think you're going to be trading for a reliever. But even then, I don't envision that being a good idea. I know a lot of people are saying adding a reliever is something they should do. And a lot of fans are, even the ones who are skeptical about making a move, think that maybe a reliever is a good idea. They've been connected to All-Star reliever Pat Nessick, who is a veteran reliever. He was in the All-Star game for the Philadelphia Phillies. Kind of reminds me of Brad Ziegler from last year when they made that move, which was actually a good trade in my mind. Ziegler was an effective reliever for Boston. You have questions in the back of the bullpen. Kimbrel's been really solid, but will Joe Kelly hold up under the pressure? Matt Barnes hasn't been able to do that. Heath Hembry, you don't want him going out there. Robbie Scott. You really only feel good about Craig Kimbrel in the late innings, 8th, 9th inning, or even 7th inning with the game on the line. Maybe Joe Kelly, but I don't feel that confident in him for that. I think he's probably your second best option in the late inning. So that definitely concerns me. Carson Smith is supposed to be, rehabbing. We've heard this for months. I expected him in Pawtucket like 3 weeks ago. I thought I was going to see him there, and hasn't really gotten the green light to start a rehab assignment. Still having discomfort after Tommy John last year. If he comes back, he's a really solid late inning reliever, but really, who knows what you're even going to get out of him? Who knows if the rehab assignment is going to go well? A lot of questions there. I look at Brandon Workman down in Pawtucket, a guy who really is looking for another major league opportunity. He pitched earlier this year at the major league level, was effective in limited time, really was. 2013, Brandon Workman was really, really solid in that playoff run. Ended up winning the World Series, and he was one of the more reliable relievers out of that bullpen. He was electric out of the bullpen. Actually, he got shut down as well. He had an injury as well, like Carson Smith. So it'll be interesting to see what happens here. But this Boston Red Sox team, I almost said Boston Celtics. I don't think really going out and getting like a Mike Minor or a Pat Nessick's really a great idea. I think Brandon Workman should get an opportunity here. I don't think it's worth trading any more prospects out. But I would have to say that if they're going to go make a move, I think it should be for a reliever. I think that's acceptable. I think there is a trade that probably makes sense to make. But I don't think they should give up much for it. I don't think it's worth it. I think they've traded away enough prospects. But they do need help in that bullpen. They do need a late inning guy, and I don't really know if they have within the organization. So maybe a trade is necessary to get a relief pitcher. We move on to the final topic here before ending the show here on Trifecta Sport Talk. I'm going to give you 5 things to watch in the coming weeks with the Boston Red Sox. Then I'll give you some 5 key stats and notes heading into the second half. So one of the things to watch going forward is a trade for a reliever, which I just mentioned. Another thing to look for is the outcome of the Red Sox-Yankees series. To kick off the second half, Yankees have kind of gotten cold in the last month. The Red Sox have gotten hot in the last month. So the outcome of the series can really set the tone for the second half of the season. Third thing to look out for, Rick Porcello's second half. Depending on how he goes, the Red Sox could go in terms of being a really solid team and going on a run here. Hanley Ramirez contributing is my 4th thing to look forward to. Rough start to the year, but started to pull it around a little bit in the last couple of weeks. And if he can really be something like he was last year in the second half, that really helped the consistency of the Boston Red Sox offense. And that is actually the 5th point to look forward to, is the offense showing consistency. They had a week or so in the first half where everything was really firing on all cylinders, but they kind of sputter out. That's really their issue, is that they haven't been able to put it all together for a month. If they can put it all together and remain consistent, they can really go on a run to start the second half. 5 key stats and notes heading into the second half. Red Sox are 50-39. They sit in first place in the American League East. They're 3.5 games ahead of the New York Yankees. Another point. They're the second highest batting average in the American League at 2.68 batting average, only behind the Houston Astros. Astros are batting around 290 as a team, so they are significantly higher, but Boston's second, which is important. On the flip side, this is something that's very concerning to me, is they're not hitting for power, not hitting for home runs. They rank dead last in the American League in home runs with only 92 home runs at the All-Star break. Many are comparing them to the 2015 World Series champion Royals in that sense, where high average, a lot of hits, not a lot of home runs. But even that Royals team that won the World Series in 2015 ranked 6th in the American League in home runs. So Red Sox home runs are going to have to kick up in the second half if they hope to really compete, because that's going to be a big part of their game, and they certainly have the capability to hit home runs. Number 4, as we shift towards the pitching here, they have the second lowest ERA in the American League with a 3.82 ERA behind Cleveland. They have third best starter ERA with a 4.21. They have the second best relievers ERA with a 3.08, also behind Cleveland. The 5th and final stat and keynote heading into the second half, Mookie Betts leads the American League in doubles with 29. But Betts is the only Red Sox hitter that leads the American League in any category. For pitchers, the only leader on the team is actually Chris Sale, who leads the American League in whip with a .90 and strikeouts with 178 strikeouts. So you have some leaders there. I think with Betts, it's interesting. He is hitting a ton of doubles, but everything else really isn't there for him. He does have 16 home runs, but if you really look at the Red Sox here offensively, there's not a lot of players in the top 10 for stats. I think Betts is the only Red Sox player in any offensive category that's in top 10. Pedroia might be in one of them. If you look at pitching, Chris Sale's in 2 of the top 10s for important categories for pitches, but no one else is. So it's interesting. They're a first-place team, but there's still a lot of room for improvement, and ultimately, I'm not really sure what they're going to be. If they're going to be a World Series team, I don't know, but Las Vegas pegs them as the 3rd highest chance of winning the World Series, which certainly is a big deal for them, and we'll see what happens, but I'm not convinced. I think they still need another reliever. I don't know if it is a Brandon Workman. I hope it is. Maybe Joe Kelly. Maybe it's Carson Smith coming back from injury. A lot of unknowns here. Third base is still an unknown, even though we've been able to stabilize it in the month of July. Starting rotation, Chris Sale, I think he's going to be pretty reliable. I think Drew Palmer is going to have a really good second half. I think, Juan Rodriguez is going to come back and is going to have some success. He looked really, really good in Pawtucket on Sunday. and he looked really good before going down in the DL. David Price has kind of looked good as well, and I think he has a lot to pitch for now. I think Rick Porcello is going to turn it around if he can get that sinker ball to work. This Red Sox team, they're a 50-win team here. They're in first place in the American League East, and I think they still have a lot to prove and a lot to show, and I think they haven't hit their ceiling yet. I think there really is a potential for this team to win 90-plus games. They should win the American League East, just given the East around them is not that good, the league, in terms of their division. The Yankees losing Michael Pineda for the rest of the year. That's a big hit for them, but, the Yankees have Gary Sanchez, Aaron Judge, a really talented team right there, young players. That's going to be a fun thing. And if they're the number 1, number 2 team here, Red Sox, Yankees, should be a really fun second half for baseball. Thank you for listening to Trifecta Sports Talk. I'll be back next Wednesday from 2 to 4 p.m. on Wire, as well as you're watching this on either YouTube, Facebook, SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, TuneIn Radio. There's a bunch. So thanks for listening. Make sure to check us out on TrifectaNetwork.com. That is TrifectaNetwork.com. On Saturday, we're probably going to be doing a Facebook Live somewhere in Boston ahead of the Red Sox-Yankee game, giving some thoughts and previews at the series, as well as talking about probably third base as well and MLB trade deadline. Evan Cook will join me. He's the Kentucky Red Sox beat reporter for Trifecta Network. So we should have a pretty good discussion going on tomorrow. But if not, catch us on 2 to 4 on Wednesday and probably 2 to 4 next Friday as well. Make sure to have a great weekend and watch some baseball.